The tragic truth about Norm Cash is not something most people are prepared to hear the first time someone tells it to them. You come in expecting a baseball story. You come in expecting home runs and records and a man who could fill any room he walked into with something that felt like sunlight. You come in expecting laughter because that is what Norm Cash always delivered. And you get all of that. You get every single piece of it. The batting titles, the World Series ring. The afternoon he walked to the plate carrying a table leg instead of a bat and made 30,000 people forget for a moment that their team was being no-hit. The quiet hospital visits that almost nobody knew about while they were happening. The leadership that showed up without announcing itself. You get a career that stretched 15 full seasons across the best years of Detroit baseball, and a personality so large and so genuine that the city built a kind of love around him that does not fade easily. But somewhere underneath all of those good things, underneath the trophies and the laughter and the records and the reputation, there is a night on a remote island in the cold middle of Lake Michigan, a slippery dock in the rain, a fall in the dark, and a silence that has never fully gone away. This is the story the legends of baseball wanted you to know. The story of Stormin Norman Cash. And the tragic truth is that the best parts of who he was and the worst parts of how it ended are more connected than most people ever realized. If there was one man in baseball history who deserved a better final chapter, it was him. He walked into a dark October night on a broken dock, and the city of Detroit never fully recovered from losing him. Before we go any deeper into this one, if the kind of honest and detailed baseball storytelling you just heard in that intro is exactly what brought you here today, go ahead right now and hit that hype button to support the video. It genuinely means more than you know. And then stay right here, because this story is only getting heavier from here. There are two shadows that follow Norm Cash everywhere, even now, decades after he left the game and the world behind him. The first is what he did with a baseball bat during the 1961 season, and more importantly, what he later admitted about it without any hesitation or apology. The second is what took place on a dark October night in 1984 on Beaver Island, Michigan, when a man who had survived decades of professional baseball and everything that kind of life throws at a person slipped away in the kind of quiet and lonely way that none of the people who knew him could ever fully make sense of. Both of those things matter here. Both of them belong to this story, but you cannot feel the full weight of his death without first understanding what kind of person he was before any of that caught up to him. And that story starts somewhere most baseball fans have never heard of. Norman Dalton Cash was born in 1934 in a small community called Justisburg, Texas. If you have never come across that name before, you are not alone. Justisburg sits in the rugged western stretch of the state, the kind of place where the land is enormous and the towns are small, and the people who grow up there tend to carry a certain self-reliance with them wherever they go for the rest of their lives. Cash carried it in abundance. From the very beginning, he was not simply an athlete. He was the kind of athlete who made coaches in every sport want him on their side at the same time. His physical gifts were so obvious and so explosive that before his baseball career ever really found its footing, the Chicago Bears drafted him as a fullback in football, a fullback in the National Football League. The same raw power and surprising agility that would eventually produce 377 career Major League home runs over a career stretching nearly 2 decades long was almost spent entirely on professional football fields instead. That single fact gives you the scale of talent that walked into every stadium Norm Cash ever played in. His path to Detroit was not a direct one. He began in professional baseball with the Chicago White Sox, spent a brief and largely unproductive stretch with the Cleveland Indians, and then came the trade that would change the trajectory of the Tigers franchise permanently. Before the 1960 season, Detroit acquired Cash in exchange for a player named Steve Demeter. On the surface, it looked like a standard move. What it turned out to be was one of the most lopsided transactions in the history of the sport. Demeter played exactly 4 more Major League games after that trade. 4 total. Cash spent the next 15 seasons in Detroit, becoming one of the most prolific hitters in franchise history, finishing his career second only to the great Al Kaline in all-time Tigers home runs at the time of his retirement. If you were a Tigers fan watching that deal get made in 1960, you had no real idea what you were about to receive. Detroit found out quickly. And when Cash arrived, he did not simply bring his bat and his glove through the clubhouse door. He brought himself, all of himself, the humor, the warmth, the Texas confidence, the absolute refusal to let the pressure of professional baseball strip any of the joy out of the game. In a clubhouse that featured some deeply serious and fiercely competitive players, Cash was the one who made sure the whole thing stayed human. Number 10, Ernie Harwell, the legendary voice of the Detroit Tigers and one of the most respected broadcasters in the history of American sports, had a phrase he used to describe Cash that stuck with every person who ever heard it. He called Cash old-fashioned likable. Harwell said Cash possessed a rare and natural gift for finding something funny in the ordinary, something worth smiling at in the middle of a grinding road trip or a difficult losing streak. He said Cash made the clubhouse feel lighter, even during the seasons when nothing was going right in the standings. Coming from Harwell, who had spent decades watching players arrive and depart and who chose every word with care, that specific description was not a small observation. It was a precise and important one about a very specific kind of person. Number 9, Al Kaline, the great right fielder who defined the Tigers' outfield for 2 full decades and who is widely regarded as the finest player in franchise history, spoke about Cash in a way that said more than statistics ever could. Kaline said that Cash always came ready to play. Not most days, not when he was healthy and feeling sharp, always. A broken finger, a sore knee, a morning when rest would have been the sensible option. It simply did not factor into Cash's calculation. He showed up, he put on the uniform, he took his position at first base, and he gave everything that day had to offer. Kaline noted that in a clubhouse full of talented and competitive people, Cash was the one who held the emotional center of the group together on the days when the pressure tried to pull it all apart. Without that kind of presence, the weight would have been harder on everyone around him. That warmth, that consistent and unconditional generosity of spirit, is something worth holding on to as the story moves into more complicated territory. Because what comes next is where the picture begins to darken. The 1961 season of Norm Cash is one of the most remarkable individual performances in the history of the American League. There is no cleaner way to state it. He batted .361 that year. He hit 41 home runs and drove in 132 runs. He led the entire American League in hits with 193, and he led the league in on-base percentage at .487. He was better than Mickey Mantle in batting average that season, better than Roger Maris, better than every single hitter in the junior circuit, and it was not especially close. His career batting average entering that season sat around .271. A jump of nearly 100 points does not occur on its own. It does not come from working harder in the offseason or getting a little luckier on the infield grass. Something changed in 1961, and Cash eventually told the world exactly what that something was. He admitted it himself. Openly. He sat down with Sports Illustrated and walked reporters through the entire process in detail. He had used a corked bat for the entire 1961 campaign. He showed them how it worked. You take a bat, you drill a hole down into the barrel of the wood. You fill that cavity with a mixture of sawdust, cork, and glue. You seal the opening and sand it smooth. From the outside, the bat looks like every other bat in the rack. On the inside, mass has been removed from where it used to be. The bat is lighter. A lighter bat creates a faster swing. A faster swing means you hold your decision a beat longer on each pitch, read the movement a fraction more clearly, and make solid contact on balls that would have beaten you with heavier wood. It is not legal. It is cheating. That word applies here, and it needs to be said directly before anything else gets discussed. Cash himself seemed almost at ease with the whole thing, which was entirely consistent with who he was. He said his 1961 success came down to 3 factors: expansion pitching, a short right field fence, and, in his own words, my hollow bat. He delivered that line with the kind of quiet amusement of someone who has already decided how they feel about something and is not interested in pretending otherwise. And his complete openness about it made many people like him more rather than less. His honesty was so total and so unapologetic that fans and fellow players found themselves admiring the candor, even as they understood what the act itself meant. But admiration for the honesty does not erase what the act was. A batting title built on a corked bat is a tainted batting title. Both of those things can be true at once. The hard evidence of what the cork actually did for him is sitting right there in the following year. His batting average collapsed from .361 all the way down to .243 in 1962, 118 points. It is one of the largest single-season declines in the recorded history of professional baseball. He went from the best hitter in the American League to a below-average contact man in 12 calendar months. Something real had been removed from his performance, and the numbers made that visible to everyone watching. Number 8, Brooks Robinson, the Hall of Fame third baseman for the Baltimore Orioles, who spent his career carefully studying every left-handed hitter he faced and figuring out how to neutralize them, called Cash one of the most difficult left-handed outs in the league. He described Cash as a hitter with what Robinson called deceptive power, the kind of swing that did not announce itself loudly until the ball was already over the roof. Robinson was talking about the real Cash, the genuinely dangerous hitter who lived underneath the controversy and the corked wood. And that hitter was absolutely real. Cash hit 39 home runs in 1962, even as his contact numbers fell off the table. The raw power belonged entirely to him. What the corked bat had done was amplify his ability to put the barrel squarely on the ball, to make contact on pitches he would have otherwise fouled off or missed, to turn near misses into base hits at a rate his natural swing could not sustain. The contact rate in 1961 was manufactured. The power behind it was genuine. So the legacy settles into that uncomfortable space between two true things sitting side by side. A real and dangerous hitter who built his most famous season on hollow wood and then admitted it freely to the world, and somehow became more interesting as a person for having done so. Critics point out, and they are not wrong, that his exclusion from the Hall of Fame is almost certainly tied directly to that admission. The voters weighed a player with borderline credentials against a player with borderline credentials and a corked bat on the record, and they left him out. That outcome is not difficult to understand, even if it feels painful to the people of Detroit who watched him play. And here is the part that cuts the deepest. Cash probably knew it too. He admitted it anyway. He could have stayed quiet. He could have taken the batting title and the memories and let history treat the 1961 season as nothing more complicated than a great year. Instead, he told the truth. That kind of honesty is rare. It does not make the act right, but it says something about the man that no batting average can say. But Cash was not the kind of man to let a complicated truth slow him down or change the way he moved through the world. He had a way of walking back toward the light and pulling everyone else along with him, and nothing in his entire career demonstrates that quality more perfectly than what took place at Tiger Stadium on the evening of July 15th, 1973. The California Angels were in town. Nolan Ryan was on the mound. Ryan was already one of the most dominant pitchers alive at that point, a man who could do things with a baseball that seemed to operate outside the normal boundaries of what pitching was supposed to be. On this particular night, he was on a different level entirely. He had thrown a no-hitter earlier that same season, and now he was standing one final out away from throwing his second no-hitter of the year. He had already struck out 17 Detroit Tigers by the time the final batter came to the plate. 17 batters sent back to the dugout. The crowd understood what they were witnessing. Every Tiger in the dugout understood it too. The final out was inevitable, and everyone in the building knew it. The only question left was what the ending would look like. Norm Cash had a very specific answer to that question, and it had nothing to do with a regulation baseball bat. He came out of the dugout and walked calmly toward the batter's box. In his hands, where a bat was supposed to be, he was carrying a wooden table leg. A leg pulled from a piece of furniture somewhere inside the Tigers' clubhouse. He walked to the plate with it like it was the most natural thing he had ever done in his life. Number 7. Nolan Ryan talked about this moment many times over the years and never seemed to lose any genuine appreciation for it. Ryan said that what Cash did that night was equal parts humor and gamesmanship, a complete and theatrical acknowledgement of total domination, delivered with enough warmth and comedy that it transformed the moment into something that belonged to everyone in the stadium equally. Ryan said it did not disturb his concentration on the mound at all, but it added something to the history of that night that no base hit or strikeout record ever could have provided. The plate umpire was Ron Luciano, a man who was known for having some personality of his own. Even Luciano had to step in and tell Cash that the table leg was not a legal instrument for batting. Cash looked at him with perfect calm and said exactly this: "Why not? I won't hit him anyway." The stadium broke open. Players on both sides were laughing. The thick tension of a historical moment dissolved into something warm and human, and entirely unique to the man standing at the plate. Cash walked back, selected a real bat from the rack, stepped back into the box, and proved himself right in the most complete way possible. He popped up to end the game. He had announced exactly what was about to happen, and then he went and made it happen precisely as promised. The accuracy of his prediction somehow made the whole thing funnier than it already was. The moment burned itself so deeply into baseball memory that it eventually made its way into a Simpsons episode. The specific choice of object was borrowed from Ernie Harwell's original broadcast of the Cash incident, in which Harwell described the object slightly differently than it actually was. The details shifted a little in the translation, as they always do, but the spirit of the moment was carried through perfectly intact. Cash had turned complete and public athletic helplessness into the signature story of an entire season. That was a specific and rare kind of genius that no stat line ever fully captured. While that moment earned him permanent space in baseball folklore, the daily reality of what Cash did on a baseball field for 15 full seasons was something quieter and something that often went underappreciated because reliability and defensive excellence do not generate the same kinds of stories that hollow bats and table legs do. But the people who played with him and depended on him knew exactly what he brought. Cash led the American League in assists 3 separate times during his career. He led the league in fielding percentage twice. He ranked among the all-time leaders in double plays for first baseman at the time of his retirement. He played 1,943 games at first base over his career. That level of sustained presence at a single position across 15 seasons is not a footnote. That is the career itself. It requires a depth of professional commitment and physical reliability that has nothing to do with laughter or charisma. Number 6. Denny McLain is one of the most complicated and debated figures in the history of Detroit baseball. A pitcher who in 1968 went out and won 31 games in a single season, something the modern game has not seen since. McLain was not a man who offered praise casually or expressed gratitude unless he truly meant it. So when McLain said that he always felt better when he looked in from the mound and saw Cash positioned at first base, it carried real weight. McLain described Cash's range and his sure hands and his ability to dig bad throws out of the dirt and convert errant throws into outs that by all rights should have been singles or errors. He said Cash gave the entire pitching staff a foundation of reliability that mattered enormously across a long and demanding season. On June 27, 1963, Cash played an entire game at first base and recorded 0 putouts. Not a single ball came his way to convert into an out from the first inning through the 9th. For a position that typically sees consistent action on ground balls and routine throws from the infield, playing through 9 complete innings without a single putout is a statistical oddity that almost does not seem possible. It happened. And what it illustrates about Cash is something real. You have to remain locked in and ready at first base every single inning, prepared for a play that might never arrive, because the one moment you relax might be the one moment it comes. Cash stayed ready. K-Line said it simply, Cash always came ready to play. That was the truth of who he was every day he walked onto a baseball field. The part of Norm Cash's story that never made the back of baseball cards or the highlight reels, the part that lived entirely away from the lights and the cameras, was in many ways the most honest picture of who he was. Number 5. Jimmy Boutsikaris was the owner of the Lindell AC in Detroit, a bar that served as the social center for generations of Detroit athletes across every professional sport the city has ever loved. He had known more professional players across more decades than most people could count, and he had spent that entire time paying close attention to what they did with their time and their energy and their attention when the games were over and nobody was watching. Boutsikaris ranked Cash in the top 5 of every player he had ever known in his life for one specific quality: human goodness. Not talent, not fame, not even charm, though Cash had plenty of all 3: human goodness. What that meant in specific terms was this. Cash visited children's hospitals in Detroit, not occasionally when a charity event required it, regularly, on his own, without anyone asking. He brought baseballs. He sat with young patients for hours at a time, talking with kids who were sometimes so ill they barely understood where they were or who was sitting next to them. Kids who often had no idea they were in the presence of a man who had hit over 300 home runs and played in a World Series championship. Cash did not want the recognition. He did not bring a reporter or a photographer. He simply showed up because he wanted to be there. That is a category of generosity that runs considerably deeper than the kind that comes with a press release. Number 4. Sparky Anderson, who managed the Tigers to a World Series title and who spent the entirety of his professional life around baseball players in every city the game touched, described Cash as one of the happiest Tigers he had ever encountered and a genuine pillar of the Detroit community. Anderson had watched hundreds of players perform charity as a public relations necessity, and hundreds more who did it because it mattered to them personally. He knew the difference between those two things. Cash was clearly the second kind, and the community around him felt it in a way that went far beyond any particular at-bat. Number 3. Mickey Mantle was Cash's contemporary in the American League for years, a man who understood personally and in great detail what it cost to be a public figure in professional baseball during that era. Because he lived that cost every single season of his career. Mantle struggled throughout his playing life with the weight of expectation, with the relentlessness of public attention, with the price of never simply being allowed to be ordinary. In Cash, Mantle said he saw someone who had figured out something he himself was still working hard to find. Cash understood how to carry the game without being crushed by it. He understood that the pressure was real, but that joy was available every single day if you simply chose to reach for it rather than push it away. He understood that life offered chances for kindness, and that you could miss every one of them entirely if you let the sport swallow everything else you were. To Mantle, that balance was rare and precious. He admired it in Cash, the way you admire someone who found a clear and honest path to something you have spent years approaching through the long and difficult way. All of that goodness, all of that laughter and warmth and quiet generosity and genuine love for the people around him makes what came next carry a weight that is hard to fully put into words. October 12, 1984. Norm Cash was 51 years old. His playing days were years behind him, but baseball had not let go of him, and he had not let go of it. He had built a real second career in broadcasting, working for ABC's Monday Night Baseball and contributing to local Tigers television coverage. He was known and loved in that world the same way he had always been known and loved in every clubhouse he ever inhabited. Warm and funny and real in a way that reached people wherever they were. On this particular night, he was on Beaver Island, a remote and rugged piece of land in the northern part of Lake Michigan, where he and his wife Dorothy owned a condominium. He knew the island. He had been there before. He had no reason to feel anything other than comfortable and at ease. The night before his death, on October 11th, the weather around Beaver Island shifted badly. Rain moved in across the lake. Heavy fog rolled over the docks and the water and the paths between the buildings. The air was cold and damp and dark in the particular way that Michigan nights in mid-October can become dark without much warning. Around midnight, Cash told Dorothy and a friend that he was going to walk over and check on his boat, a 33-foot cabin cruiser docked at a pier a short distance away. He stepped out into the night and moved toward the water. He was wearing cowboy boots. That detail deserves a moment of attention before the story moves past it. Cowboy boots are not dock shoes. Their soles are smooth. They provide almost no grip on wet surfaces. The dock that Cash was walking toward had not been properly maintained and was in poor condition. Old wood, uneven boards, inadequate repair. In the rain and the fog, on deteriorated planking, with no traction from his footwear and limited visibility from the weather, it was genuinely dangerous terrain for anyone. For someone whose coordination was further compromised by what came next, it was worse. Number 2. The Associated Press report from 1984 documents what followed. Cash went missing during the storm, slipped on the dock, and fell. An autopsy revealed a blood alcohol level of 0.18. That is more than twice the legal limit for operating a motor vehicle in most of the country. At that level, balance is significantly impaired. Reaction time is reduced. The ability to catch yourself when your footing shifts on a slick surface is compromised in ways that effort and strength cannot overcome. On a poorly maintained dock, in the rain and fog, in the middle of the night, those deficits combined in the worst possible way. The chain of events was not long, and it was not complicated. It was just devastating. Dangerous weather with near zero visibility. A dock in poor condition that nobody had gotten around to fixing. Boots that provided no traction on wet wood. Alcohol that slowed every physical response his body tried to make when the moment came and his footing shifted. A fall, a blow to the head on the way down that the autopsy made clear. Cold water and cold shock taking hold in seconds. A man who did not come back up. All of it together, each piece feeding into the next, forming a chain that did not need a conspiracy or a villain to explain. Just bad conditions, bad choices, and a night that had no forgiveness in it. The lake does not care who you are. It does not care how many home runs you hit or how hard the city loved you. It is just cold water in October. And on this night, that was enough. Detroit received the news the following morning and went quiet. This was the man who had given the city 15 years of laughter and excellence, and World Series baseball, and hospital visits nobody even knew to mention. He was found in the cold water of Lake Michigan on a gray October morning. The contrast between who he had been and how his story ended was almost too severe to process as simply true. It was the kind of ending that people refused to accept at face value because it felt too random and too cruel for a person who had offered so much to everyone around him for so long. And that refusal is where the theory came from. The theory was dark, and it was very specific. It was popularized primarily through the work of an author named Carl Nemec, who cited a story reportedly told by Alex Karras. Karras was a former Detroit Lions lineman and later an actor and television personality, a man deeply embedded in the Detroit sports world who had known many of the same people and moved in many of the same circles as Cash. According to Nemec's account of the Karras story, Cash had accumulated serious gambling debts with people who were not patient creditors. Karras allegedly claimed that Cash owed the wrong kind of people more than he could ever pay back, and that those people had made a decision about what to do next. The alleged method was specific and disturbing. Karras reportedly described Cash being taken to his own boat, being hung over the side of the hull, his cowboy boots filled with water to serve as weights, and then being held under the surface until he drowned. The image stuck because the detail of the cowboy boots matched the official account in a way that seemed to give the story a surface plausibility, and some of Cash's friends found it difficult to accept the accident explanation when they considered his physical strength. Cash had been a college football player. He was a large and powerful man. How, they asked, does someone like that drown in water that close to shore? That question has hard answers that do not require a conspiracy to provide them. A blood alcohol level of 0.18 does not only impair the ability to operate a vehicle, it impairs every physical system that keeps a person upright and able to respond to sudden instability. A blow to the head, confirmed clearly by the autopsy, can take a person off the field almost instantly. And the water of Lake Michigan in October sits at near freezing temperatures. Cold shock response, the physiological reaction the human body produces when suddenly submerged in very cold water, can cause drowning in seconds, regardless of how physically capable or athletically gifted the person is. Head trauma plus alcohol plus cold water is a complete and sufficient chain. Nothing additional is required to explain what happened to Norm Cash on that dock. And more importantly, no credible evidence of murder has ever been produced. The Karras story remains an allegation. Points to an accident, a terrible and preventable accident, made up of small bad conditions and small bad choices that assembled themselves into something fatal. The theory lives on because the ending felt too cruel to be accidental. That feeling is completely understandable. It is not evidence. Number 1. George Brett, the Hall of Fame third baseman for the Kansas City Royals, referred to himself openly, and more than once, as a disciple of Norm Cash. He had grown up hearing all the stories: the hollow bat, the table leg, the hospital visits that never made the papers. The way Cash played the game like it was the greatest privilege in the world, while never once forgetting there were things outside of it that mattered even more. Brett admired Cash the way you admire someone who actually found the answer to something that most people spend their entire careers searching for without ever quite arriving. When Cash died, Brett said the news landed hard on a lot of people in the game. He put it plainly: you are not a kid forever, and the world outside the lines can be a lot more dangerous than a fastball coming in at your ribs. That sentence holds everything that needed to be said. It holds grief and humility and the honest reckoning that comes when you realize the person you thought had it all figured out was just as exposed and just as vulnerable as everyone else. It holds a love for Cash that is honest precisely because it does not look away from anything. The legacy of Norm Cash does not collapse into a single easy story. On one side sits a man who cheated with a bat and told the world about it, and somehow came out more human for having done so. On the other side sits a batting title built on hollow wood and a Hall of Fame door that never opened for him because of it. On one side are 15 seasons of laughter and elite performance, and quiet hospital visits and genuine community love. On the other side is a cold dock and a dark lake, and a death that still brings questions with it when the city thinks about him on October nights. And in the middle of all of it is just a person, flawed and funny and generous and real, who made the game better by simply being himself every single day he showed up. That is a legacy worth knowing. That is a legacy worth sitting with long enough to feel the full weight of it. But underneath all of it, beneath the controversy and the comedy and the tragedy and the rumors, one thing does not shrink no matter how much light you put on it. It is the thing Jimmy Butsukaris said: human goodness. The children in hospital wards who received baseballs and hours of patient attention from a man who had nothing to prove and no audience to perform for. The teammates who played better and laughed harder because he made the clubhouse feel like a place worth showing up to every single morning. The city that still says his name with a smile before the sadness arrives. Norm Cash played first base in Detroit for 15 seasons. He hit 377 home runs. He won a World Series. He admitted to cheating and did not look away from it. He lost his life at 51 on a cold island in the middle of a dark Michigan lake. And every legend who ever stood beside him or faced him across a diamond remembered what it felt like to be near someone who had made a quiet and permanent decision that joy was not optional. It was the entire point of showing up. That is who he was, and that is who he will always be in the memory of the people who knew him and the city that loved him. That is the tragic truth of Norm Cash. And the human goodness at the center of it is the one statistic that no corked bat and no slippery dock and no October storm will ever take away from him. Baseball produced many great players. It produced very few people quite like him. If this story moved you the way it moves everyone who sits with it long enough, hit like, subscribe so the next one finds you, and drop a comment below telling us which moment from his remarkable life hit you the hardest. Every single comment gets read. We want to hear from you. That is a genuine promise.